It was a crisp morning at the naval base, the kind of morning when the air feels almost electric and even the smallest sound seems amplified. The sun had just begun to rise, casting long shadows across the wide, empty hangars where the smell of oil and salt lingered in the air. The Admiral, a man known for his unwavering discipline and meticulous attention to detail, was making his rounds. His polished boots echoed against the concrete floors, a sound that always commanded attention. He was used to order, precision, and a kind of quiet efficiency that few could match, say I. Yet today, something felt different. As he walked past rows of parked aircraft and vehicles, his eyes scanned the area with practiced sharpness. It was during this routine inspection that he noticed a small group of veterans gathered near one of the older hangars. Unlike the younger recruits or active officers, these men moved slowly, some with canes, others leaning on the shoulders of comrades. Their uniforms were faded, the colors muted by years of wear and countless campaigns. But there was something in their posture, something almost regal, that caught the Admiral's attention. Among them stood an old man whose presence seemed to command respect without a word. He was hunched over slightly, his back curved with age, yet there was a strength in his stance that contradicted his frailty. Curiosity, something the Admiral rarely allowed to disrupt his focus, nudged him forward. He approached the old man, his steps measured and deliberate. Good morning, sir," he said, his voice firm but polite. "I don't believe we've met." The veteran looked up slowly, his eyes meeting the Admiral's with a clarity that startled him. Despite the wrinkles etched deeply into his face, there was a sharpness in his gaze, a spark that suggested a mind still alert and memories still vivid. "Oh, morning, Admiral," the veteran replied, his tone steady, almost casual. There was no hint of arrogance or boastfulness, only a calm that seemed unusual for someone in such worn attire. The Admiral studied the veteran carefully. His uniform, though worn, was adorned with medals and patches, each faded but significant. Some of them were almost unrecognizable, worn smooth by years of handling and countless washes. The Admiral could tell that these were not merely decorations, but symbols of experiences that had shaped the man standing before him. Something about the veteran's demeanor suggested stories untold, missions completed under circumstances the Admiral could only imagine, battles fought in silence, victories achieved with quiet determination. The veteran's hands were steady as he adjusted his jacket, revealing faint scars along his wrists. The Admiral noticed a chill running down his spine. These were not the marks of ordinary life. They were reminders of moments when danger had been real and survival uncertain. And yet, the veteran moved with a calm assurance, as if he had long since made peace with the chaos of his past. As the Admiral continued to observe him, he realized that there was a sense of stillness about this man, a calm that seemed almost out of place amidst the usual clamor of the base. Where others might rush to recount tales of heroism or recount their achievements, the old veteran seemed content to simply exist in the moment, letting his presence speak for itself. This quiet confidence was magnetic, drawing the Admiral, and despite his disciplined nature, the surrounding veterans, sensing the Admiral's interest, began to step back slightly, creating a small circle around the two men. There was a mutual understanding among them, respect for the old man, and perhaps a silent acknowledgement that something extraordinary had once walked among them. The Admiral, ever observant, could feel the weight of history pressing in, an invisible force connecting the past to the present. He decided to break the silence. "I imagine you've seen a lot in your time," he said cautiously, not wanting to overstep but unable to resist the pull of curiosity. The veteran nodded slightly, the faintest hint of a smile touching his lips. "Lifetime," he said simply, as if those two words could encompass decades of missions, battles, and memories too heavy to fully express. The Admiral's mind raced, piecing together the possible stories hidden behind the veteran's calm exterior. He wondered about the missions that had tested courage and resolve, the camaraderie built under pressure, the moments when life and death balanced on a knife's edge. Yet the veteran remained composed, almost serene, his eyes reflecting both the weight of experience and the quiet pride of having survived it all. For the Admiral, who had spent years commanding officers and overseeing operations, this was a rare moment of humility. Here was a man whose very presence demanded respect, not because of rank or accolades, but because of the life he had lived and the integrity with which he had carried it. The quiet dignity of the veteran, the subtle strength in his posture, the unspoken stories etched in every line on his face. All of it combined to form a portrait of someone truly extraordinary. In that moment, as the Admiral stood in the shadowed hangar surrounded by the hum of early morning activity, he sensed that this encounter was the beginning of a story he had never anticipated. A story not of strategy or command, but of courage, honor, and the hidden acts of heroism that too often go unnoticed. He had no idea yet that a single question would unlock memories so powerful, so shocking, that it would leave him momentarily speechless and forever changed. And so, in the stillness of the hangar, amid the faint scent of oil and metal, a quiet tension settled between the two men. It was a tension born not of fear, but of anticipation, the kind that comes before the unveiling of a truth long hidden. A truth that would soon reveal why some heroes remain unsung, waiting patiently for the right moment to remind the world of their extraordinary lives. After exchanging polite greetings, the Admiral felt a rising curiosity he could not suppress. The veteran's presence was magnetic in every detail. The steady way he stood, the quiet authority in his voice, the subtle scars on his hands, hinted at stories buried deep in history. The Admiral, a man who prided himself on knowing the past of every officer under his command, was now facing someone whose history he could barely imagine. "Ah, tell me," the Admiral began, trying to keep his tone casual, "what was your call sign back in the day?" The question seemed simple, almost routine, but as soon as the words left his lips, the veteran's demeanor shifted. He straightened slightly, though his back was still curved with age. His eyes darkened with memory, gazing far beyond the hangar walls, as if searching for ghosts of the past. The Admiral noticed the faint tremor in his hand, a subtle sign that the memories he was about to speak of carried weight. For a long moment, the veteran remained silent. The hangar seemed to grow quieter, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Other veterans nearby glanced between the two men, sensing the tension, though none could yet guess its cause. The Admiral, normally composed and quick to command attention, felt a ripple of unease he rarely experienced. Finally, the veteran's voice cut through the stillness. Low, calm, yet carrying a weight that seemed to make the very air tremble, he said, Ghost 5. The words hung in the air. Ghost 5. The Admiral froze. Time seemed to slow as the syllables echoed in his mind. He had heard the name before, whispered in classified reports, mentioned in hushed tones during late-night briefings, but always with a sense of awe and fear. Ghost 5 was more than a call sign. It was legend. It was the name associated with a phantom squadron that had embarked on a mission so dangerous, so impossible, that everyone expected them to vanish without a trace. History had marked them as lost, their survival a question never answered, their heroism shrouded in secrecy. The Admiral's face went white. He could feel the blood draining from his cheeks as his mind raced to process the realization. Standing before him was not just an old veteran. This was a living legend. The man who had walked through decades of secrecy, who had carried the weight of impossible missions on his shoulders, was here in front of him, humble and unassuming, yet radiating an aura of quiet power. 1,000 questions surged in the Admiral's mind. How had he survived when the entire squadron had been presumed lost? Why had the world never heard his story? And why, after all these years, was he standing here in such quiet dignity, seemingly content to fade into the shadows of history? The veteran's eyes met his, and for the first time, the Admiral felt the full force of the man's experience. "We were sent on a mission that was considered suicidal," the veteran said, his voice calm, almost casual, yet carrying the weight of unimaginable danger. Unimaginable danger. Everyone thought we'd never come back. The odds were against us. The enemy was expecting us. The conditions were impossible, and the mission was classified beyond belief. But I kept my squad together. I kept them safe. That was all that mattered. What that mattered. The Admiral's mind struggled to grasp the magnitude of the statement. Every officer he had commanded had faced challenges, had faced danger, but none had carried a burden like this. Responsibility for lives in situations where death seemed inevitable. And yet, the veteran had not only survived, he had done so without letting his squad down. The hangar seemed to shrink around them, the distant hum of activity fading into insignificance. Other veterans stood quietly, their eyes reflecting respect, awe, and a shared understanding of the magnitude of the moment. This was more than a story of survival. It was a story of unwavering loyalty, courage under impossible circumstances, and a dedication to duty that transcended recognition or fame. The Admiral swallowed hard, struggling to maintain composure. "You survived that mission," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "All of you were Ghost 5. The veteran nodded. "I did what I had to do. We all did. I never thought about the fame or the medals. I just focused on my team. That was the priority. Always the team." The simplicity of his words struck the Admiral. Heroism, he realized, was not about recognition, medals, or even survival. It was about the quiet acts, the choices made in the heat of danger, when no one is watching, and when the outcome is uncertain. It was about doing what was right, even when the world might never know. The old veteran's gaze softened. "History remembers names," he said quietly, almost to himself, "but it often forgets the ones who made the sacrifices quietly. That's why it's not about us. It's about the people we protected, the missions we completed, and the lives we saved along the way." For the Admiral, the revelation was staggering. Here was a man who had defied death, achieved what most considered impossible, and yet carried no bitterness, no pride, only a humble acceptance of duty fulfilled. The legend of Ghost 5 was no longer just a story buried in secret files. It was a living testament to courage, honor, and integrity. In that suspended moment, the Admiral realized that he was not merely standing before a veteran. He was standing before a moral compass, a guide for all who would serve after him, a reminder of the true meaning of service, loyalty, and sacrifice. The call sign Ghost 5 was no longer just a name. It was a symbol of courage, humility, and unwavering dedication, one that had walked through history silently and now, quietly, had come face to face with him. The veteran's eyes seemed to drift farther back in time, as though the hangar around them had melted away, leaving only memories of distant skies, roaring engines, and the tension of a mission that had pushed men beyond the limits of endurance. The Admiral, still pale and shaken from the revelation of the call sign, leaned in slightly, sensing that he was about to hear a story few had ever been privileged to witness. "We were sent on a mission nobody believed we could survive," the veteran began, his voice steady but carrying a weight that pressed into the silence around them. "It was a reconnaissance operation, deep behind enemy lines, during a time when intelligence was scarce, and the risks were unimaginable. The enemy had fortified the area, and any misstep could have meant certain death. Yet, we had a job to do, and we accepted it without hesitation." That's what being a part of the squadron meant. The Admiral's mind raced, trying to visualize the conditions the veteran described. He imagined frozen nights, endless stretches of open water, the whine of engines, the flash of gunfire, and the invisible threads of danger that could strike without warning. The veteran smiled faintly, a trace of pride hidden behind his calm expression. "A preparation isn't enough," he said. "You can train for scenarios, but you cannot train for chaos. You can plan for success, but you cannot plan for loss. When we flew, every second demanded focus. Every decision had consequences. One mistake, and it wasn't just your life on the line, it was everyone else's." He paused as though weighing which memories could safely be shared. "Our squadron was tight-knit. We trusted each other with everything, our lives, our fears, our hopes. And that trust became the only shield we had against the odds stacked against us." The Admiral felt the weight of his words. Loyalty, trust, and duty, these were values drilled into every officer, yet rarely tested under conditions so extreme. To survive as Ghost 5 had meant not only skill and courage, but an unbreakable bond with those around him. The Admiral realized that heroism wasn't simply about individual bravery. It was about responsibility, about ensuring the survival of others even when your own life hangs by a thread. The veteran's voice grew quieter, reflective, almost sorrowful. "We were discovered on our third day behind enemy lines. The enemy's patrols were relentless. They were prepared for us. The skies were hostile and our communications were cut. We lost 2 pilots that day, friends I had flown with since our first missions. But there was no time to grieve. We kept moving, kept flying, kept thinking about those who depended on us. That was the only way forward. The Admiral's heart pounded. He imagined the intensity of those moments, the roar of engines, the tension of being hunted, the need to make split-second decisions that could save lives or end them. Every second of the mission had demanded courage beyond measure, yet the veteran recounted it with quiet humility, almost as if describing a routine day. "What happened next?" the Admiral asked, barely daring to breathe. The veteran's gaze hardened, reflecting the shadows of the past. We reached the target area, completed the reconnaissance, and began the return flight, but the enemy had anticipated our escape. Anti-aircraft fire rained down, and our formation was broken. We were scattered, isolated, and low on fuel. That's when I made the decision that would define my life. I took command, gathered the remaining pilots, and led them through a path nobody else would have attempted. It was dangerous, nearly suicidal, but it was the only chance to save them. The silence in the hangar deepened. Other veterans, sensing the gravity of the moment, watched respectfully, knowing that history was unfolding before their eyes. Not just the story of a mission, but of a man whose choices had carried the lives of his comrades. The Admiral swallowed hard. "You didn't have to. You could have saved yourself," he said, voice trembling. The veteran shook his head slowly. No, I couldn't leave anyone behind. That wasn't the code. That's not the way a squadron survives. Heroism isn't about escaping danger. It's about protecting others, even if it means risking everything you have. And we survived. Not because I was extraordinary, but because we trusted each other, relied on each other, and refused to give up. He paused, his eyes distant, reliving the ordeal. We lost more along the way than anyone will ever know. Names that history forgot. Faces that will never be seen on monuments. But I remember them. I carry them with me. That is my duty, long after the mission ended. That is why I never told anyone, because it wasn't about glory. It was about loyalty, honor, and kindness toward those who couldn't survive without it. The Admiral felt a lump rise in his throat. He had expected stories of daring maneuvers, perhaps tales of explosions or escapes. Instead, he had been shown something far deeper, the heart of a man who understood that heroism was inseparable from kindness, that courage without compassion was meaningless, and that the measure of a soldier was not how many missions he survived, but how many lives he safeguarded along the way. For the first time in years, the Admiral understood that true leadership and valor were not about recognition, medals, or history books. They were about quiet decisions, unwavering responsibility, and the relentless commitment to others' lives. The story of Ghost 5 was no longer just a classified legend. It had become a living example of courage entwined with kindness, a moral compass for all who had the privilege to hear it. And as the veteran fell silent, the hangar seemed to exhale, the tension dissolving into awe. The Admiral stood motionless, staring at a man who had faced death countless times and chosen every time to serve others above himself. In that moment, he knew that the legend of Ghost 5 was not defined by missions completed or enemies defeated, but by the quiet, enduring acts of loyalty, courage, and kindness that no history book could ever fully capture. The veteran's eyes softened as he looked at the Admiral, a faint smile touching his weathered face. The story he had shared was more than a recounting of events. It was a revelation of character, of the hidden courage that defines a person long after the battle is over. The Admiral, still reeling from the weight of what he had just heard, realized that the moment before him was a rare chance to understand heroism in its purest form. "Why did you never tell anyone?" the Admiral asked, his voice barely steady. "Why remain in the shadows all these years?" The veteran let out a soft sigh, a sound that carried decades of memories. Because it wasn't about me," he said simply, almost as if explaining something obvious. It was never about the medals, the stories, or the recognition. It was about those we served with, those whose lives depended on me, those whose sacrifices history might forget. My duty was to them, not to myself." The Admiral nodded slowly, his mind replaying every detail of the mission, every decision made under impossible circumstances. He understood, perhaps better than ever, that true heroism is rarely broadcast. It is often quiet, unseen, and uncelebrated. The old veteran had lived that heroism every day, yet had never sought acknowledgement or praise. His story was not one of fame, but of integrity, courage, and the quiet kindness of looking out for others, even when the world is indifferent. The hangar, filled with the hum of morning activity, seemed to grow still. Other veterans nearby stood in respectful silence, their eyes reflecting a shared reverence. Some of them had known parts of the story, had heard fragments over the years, but now the full truth had emerged, more powerful and humbling than any legend. "You carried more than a call sign," the Admiral said, his voice low and filled with awe. "You carried responsibility for lives." That is extraordinary. The veteran's gaze drifted to the ceiling as though recalling the endless sky over which he had flown, the dangerous paths he had navigated, and the lives he had protected. "It's not extraordinary," he replied softly. "It's what we do when we make a commitment. When you take an oath, you don't take it lightly. You don't just serve for glory. You serve for the people who rely on you, the people who cannot protect themselves. And sometimes that service comes without recognition. Sometimes it comes with loss, silence, and pain. But it is still service. And it is still meaningful." The Admiral felt a lump in his throat. He had commanded countless missions, trained hundreds of officers, and spent decades upholding discipline and strategy. Yet he had never been so profoundly affected by the power of quiet heroism. This was a lesson beyond tactics or rules. This was a lesson in humanity and the profound impact of loyalty, compassion, and selflessness. Do you ever regret it?" the Admiral asked, his voice tentative. The veteran shook his head. "I never. Every choice I made, every risk I took, I made for the people I was responsible for. That is enough. That is the only reward that matters. The rest, fame, medals, stories, those are fleeting. But the lives you save, the people you protect, that endures." The Admiral looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time saw not just a veteran, but a man who had become a living embodiment of honor. The story of Ghost 5 was no longer just a tale of wartime courage. It was a blueprint for kindness, a testament to the way selflessness can shape history quietly yet indelibly. As the veteran straightened slightly, the weight of his presence filled the hangar. The Admiral realized that here was a man who had endured what most could never imagine, yet had emerged with his humanity intact, untouched by bitterness or ego. The kind of courage he exhibited was rare, courage combined with empathy, bravery intertwined with kindness, and strength tempered by humility. "You've taught me something I cannot forget," the Admiral said, his voice heavy with emotion. "That heroism isn't about being remembered. It's about the lives you touch, the people you protect, and the kindness you show even when no one is watching." The veteran nodded once, firmly, his eyes twinkling with a quiet satisfaction. "Exactly. True heroism is a series of small choices, not a single grand act. It's choosing duty over pride, compassion over convenience, and others' lives over your own comfort. That is the measure of a person. That is what matters in the end." Oh, the hangar seemed to breathe with a newfound respect, as if the walls themselves acknowledged the significance of the story. The Admiral, once solely focused on strategy and command, now understood the deeper lessons of service, loyalty, and humanity. The legend of Ghost 5 had become more than a historical fact. It was a living, breathing example of courage, humility, and unwavering kindness. As the conversation ended, the veteran gave a small, respectful nod, a gesture of quiet finality. The Admiral, still in awe, knew that this moment would remain etched in his memory forever. He had met a man whose life exemplified the highest ideals, whose courage was inseparable from compassion, and whose heroism was defined not by recognition, but by the lives he safeguarded. And as the veteran walked away, his steps slow but steady, the Admiral realized that he had witnessed more than a story of war. He had witnessed a story of the human spirit, of courage, honor, and the enduring power of kindness. The quiet legacy of Ghost 5 would forever remind him that true heroism is not measured by medals, fame, or history books, but by the lives touched and the people protected along the way.